Hi, I'm Daniel Levinson. This is Rapier Wit, and welcome to Rapier Wit Witticisms. Hey gang, so here are a version of both revolvers and self-loading pistols, single action, double action, single action, double action. Let's start off with revolvers, because I think many of you will find that makes a little more sense, and it's pretty nice to have a place to start. So these are blank firing replicas. The firearms have all been proofed, making sure that there is no blank ammunition to be found. So what makes this a single action revolver? To be simple, and yes, I know my finger is in the trigger guard, when I pull back the hammer, the cylinder rotates, putting a blank in line with the barrel, and the trigger is ready to be pulled. Look what happens when I don't pull back the hammer. Nothing. So one, hammer has to go back. One, pull the trigger. Single action. Now, double action is a little different. Again, I've made sure it's nice and empty. The double action means I can pull the trigger, and notice the hammer's down, and when I pull the trigger, the cylinder rotates and the hammer goes back and then strikes forward, allowing me to fire. Right now I'm still holding the trigger back. Look at this. I have to let it go. So a double action means a pull of the trigger means a rotation of the cylinder and the hammer going back and forth. So for people out there who think, what about single action? Can this be fired single action? This one can be. We can pull back the hammer. And so this makes it an interesting moment of actability of the firearm. Having threat is high, threat is higher for the character. It's a little easier when you use your opposite thumb. The grips are a little different. You'll notice they sit in your hand a bit different when you hold them. So, single action, double action. Both of these are revolvers because they revolve and they have cylinders. Sounds good? Okay. Next, let's talk about self-loading pistols. Some people use the term automatic. I'm going to hold off on doing that simply because I want to make sure that when we talk about automatic, that means when I pull the trigger, the firearm empties all of its ammunition until you release the trigger. That's not what these do. So I'm going to do this backwards. Let's talk about double action for a second. This is supposed to be a Beretta, and it's a modern double action pistol. And take a look. Again, when I pull the trigger, see how the hammer goes back? Now, if this firearm had been loaded and a blank had been sitting in the chamber, the hammer would have gone back, and once it fired, the entire firearm would have cycled, throwing out the brass, allowing it to seat a new blank. The hammer would already be back, turning this double action into single action. And what does that mean on the trigger? Watch this. See where the trigger is right now? When you pull back the hammer, see how the trigger goes back a little bit? You heard the term hair trigger? Just like on the double action revolver, it becomes much, much, much lighter to cause the firearm to fire. So occasionally, I've worked on shows where I had to have the actor pull back the hammer because they found the trigger pull too hard to pull when it was in double action. Okay? So you can load this firearm, cycle it, put a round in, and ideally have the hammer down. And if you were to then pull the trigger, the entire firearm would cycle and allow you to have a quick second shot from the hammer being down. Double action. Single action, though, look what happens when I pull the trigger on this. So this is a replica of a 1911. It's missing certain devices that are found on real ones, but it's a pretty good replica. And notice, nothing can happen. I need to have the hammer back for the firearm to work. Do you see that? So the gun right now is empty, and if I were to load it and the hammer is back, and I've just put up a mechanical safety, this is called cocked and locked, as in locked back, nothing can happen. If I then release the safety, that would again cause the firearm to fire, and it would cycle. See that? It would be throwing the brass out. It locks open. This is a nice model. It locks open because it has an empty magazine, and it's letting the user know it's time to put a new magazine in. Does that make sense? So, single action. You need to pull back the hammer, just like on the revolver, to fire it. And it cycles, and then after the first shot, it's ready to fire again. Single action, double action. Okay, so I have loaded the cylinders of my revolver and the magazines of my self-loading pistols. So why don't we see how it actually looks when you fire blanks? So you saw the blanks fire. I think it's really useful to see the difference of an unfired blank. And if you can see the bottom there, the clean unstruck primer. And what does the fire blank look like? Pretty easy. These are for revolvers, you can tell, because they have a rim which keeps them nice and snug inside the cylinder and not pushed out. Very different with the self-loading pistol, and harder to tell. Best to really look to see if the primer's been struck, because this is blown open, but look how dark that one is. That was just in the magazine. So not fired, just the dirt of this firing causing that. So really the best way to know is looking at the primer on the bottom. So I hope that helped clarify some things about how a single action revolver and pistol can be different than a double action revolver or pistol. And nothing like firing some blanks to put things into perspective. I completely understand why someone wouldn't want to use blanks, but I gotta tell you, I am a prop snob. And what I really like about blanks is how they manifest a change in environment for our audience and for our performer. Now, obviously, we have to take a lot of precautions. We have to understand the safe direction in which we can fire the blank and allow the gas to move. We need to make sure that we are trained properly in its use, and even understanding where, in the case of pistols, where will these brasses fly? And finally, hearing protection, something super important. Well, I just wanted to put that out there and give you an opportunity to think about it, know about it, maybe share it. Thanks.